From the capital of the Lone Star State, welcome back to the Elephant Herd.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Elephant Herd, the official podcast of the Republican Party of Texas. My name is James Wesolek. I am the Communications Director. I am joined today by Chad Ennis, the former Forensic Audit Director at the Secretary of State. And we are going to talk today about three things, election integrity-wise, that Texas needs to do, things that Chad has seen kind of either happening in other states or growing across the country, and that Texas needs to get a step ahead of, right?
Yeah. Just looking nationally at things that are coming in, since Texas is out of session this year, we're seeing things in other states that are probably coming to Texas after the election in 2025. And the first thing we're going to see, we've seen all over the country, is the push for ranked choice voting. And ranked choice voting is basically the left's new way to, if you can't win an election, you change the rules. It's like when you made up a game with a friend when you were growing up, and you kept beating him, maybe tag, and all of a sudden, now you can only tag above the waist. It's a completely, you change the rules, so maybe I can win. And that's ranked choice voting.
And so when people think about this, ranked choice voting is when they go in and instead of voting for one candidate, they vote for their first choice candidate, a second choice candidate, a third choice candidate, et cetera, for however many candidates are on the ballot.
That's right. Usually it's combined with the elimination of party primaries. So you eliminate party primaries, and you go what's called a jungle primary or a final five primary.
So you just toss everybody in.
Yes.
At the end. Republicans and Democrats all go together.
Republicans, Democrats, many flavors of it. You don't even get the designation anymore. So it's nonpartisan. You get all the candidates on the ballot, and you rank them. Or no, you don't rank them. At that point, in the primary, you just vote for one. And then what happens is top five make the final. And then the final, what happens is what you talked about. There, I have five candidates. I have to rank them 1 through 5. And if my candidate gets the lowest votes in the first round and no one gets 50%, my candidate is eliminated, and then we move on. And my second choice becomes my first choice, and on down the line until somebody gets 50%. It's a fundamentally different way of electing people in this country. And we've seen it pushed all over the country. Close to 30 states have measures in them to push this onto the public.
And now, you said you keep going until somebody reaches 50%. But in reality, what we've seen happen is that they might not get 50%, right? Because if there's 5 candidates on the ballot, I could only mark for 2 candidates. And then if it goes to candidate 3 or ballot 3, because nobody wins on the first 2, my vote's thrown out at that point, right?
That's right. They call that ballot exhaustion. Or sometimes they do. Sometimes they get very mad when you call it ballot exhaustion because that doesn't sound good. And it isn't good. So take, for example, the classic example of this is the Alaska race with Sarah Palin. In that case, round 1, there were 3 candidates. You were supposed to rank all 3. Round 1, the Republicans got 60% of the vote. But no one got 50%. So therefore, Nick Begich, one of the Republicans, was eliminated. Turned out that 11,000 of his voters, which I think was close to 20%, didn't mark a second candidate. So what happens was, once he's eliminated, there's no other choice for those voters. Those ballots all get thrown in the trash. Run the numbers again, and the Democrat won with slightly over 50%, beating Sarah Palin, and that is now a Democrat.
50% after they just threw out 11,000 ballots.
Correct. 50,000 or 50% of the remaining
ballots.
Yes. Yeah. That seat in a very red state is now held. The House of Representatives seat is held by a Democrat.
Okay. And so you've seen this gaining steam in other areas. You mentioned Alaska and 30 other states, but Texas needs to get ahead of this a little bit and ban this practice. There was a bill about it last session, right? What happened there?
Last session, it made it through the Senate and died in the House.
Okay.
So we didn't get it over the finish line. We've seen, luckily, Luckily, Texas doesn't have ballot initiatives. That's been the choice du jour of the left to push this. We'll probably see it on the ballot in probably 4 or 5 states to move statewide. So it's coming. There's big money behind it. Give you an example of just how much money. Missouri, $7 million was spent in the last cycle to get it on the ballot. They failed. So they failed to get it on the ballot, didn't quite know the rules, didn't get all the required signatures in the right place. However, not to be deterred, they've come back and said they're going to spend $25 million this time to get it passed. The money's there. It all comes from the left, and there's a strong push for it. So in Texas, we do have Governor Abbott, when he was Attorney General, wrote an opinion, an AG's opinion, that says it's unconstitutional in Texas. It's a good opinion. I think it's solid. I think it's right. But I don't want to rely on a Attorney General's opinion to keep this out of Texas. I want legislation, and I think we should be able to get that over the hump.
Yeah, should be easy to get over the hump. But like you said, it's Texas, and crazier things have happened. So hopefully we can get a legislative fix to ban ranked choice voting. What's some of the other things, election integrity-wise, that we should be on the lookout for?
So a big thing we're also seeing nationwide, and this, again, hasn't come to Texas yet. I think it will, or at least it hasn't been detected in Texas yet, is the new version of Zuckerbucks. I mean, if you remember that from 2020, Mark Zuckerberg and crew dumped over $400 million directly into local administration, directly into counties, directly to election administrators. And that pretty much leaned as to Democrat counties, kind of pretty much a thinly disguised get out the vote effort. Well, what has happened is lots of states, like Texas, passed a ban on the practice. You can't give money directly into election administration. But not to be deterred, it's a theme coming, the left said, well, what if we came up with a membership organization instead? So you pay to join what's called now the Center for Alliance, or the Alliance for Election Excellence.
Oh, what a great name.
They've got $80 million that seeded this. And what happens with that is you pay to join, and then your payment is converted into credits in which they give you things from their smorgasbord. So they'll give you signs, election materials. They'll redo your website for you. They'll write op-eds for you. They'll do all kinds of things. They'll come in, look at your operation, put you on an improvement plan to improve in the left's version of how elections should be run. And this is all funded with dark money coming through Arabella networks and those kind of places. But we're seeing it nationally. They don't really announce everywhere they're doing it. So it's been targeted where we've been able to find out where they're doing it. But bans are being worked through legislatures. We're tracking 6 or 7 of them now going through legislatures. So it's growing, and hopefully Texas will be able to be on the forefront of that.
So if I'm a struggling elections office, I sign up for this program, and they give me all kinds of goodies that just happens to push me to the left on all kinds of issues. Right? That's the gist of how it works.
That's the gist of how it works, yeah.
And they're doing this because states like Texas and many others, in response to the Zuckbucks, said people cannot give money straight to the election administrators, so they created this little club and have folks join it that way. And so we need to be on the lookout for that. I think figure out a way to keep that out of Texas.
Certainly leading up to before we can have a session, I think, folks need to be watching their counties to make sure that, this isn't coming into their counties, to make sure that it doesn't come up on a commissioner's court meeting or something, or agenda, and keep an eye on it. But, as soon as we get into session, this needs to get banned.
Okay. Gosh, that's 2 big ones right out of the gate. What else do we have?
I think third one, big for Texas, is non-citizen voting. We need a constitutional amendment on that to make sure that it's clear that non-citizens are not allowed to vote in Texas. Biden has created a crisis at the border with folks just pouring over, and we need to make sure that those people do not get onto our voter rolls and vote. We've seen pushes across the country at the municipal level, New York in particular, D.C., I believe, trying to allow non-citizens to vote. And, if you're not a citizen of this country, you don't need to vote in this country.
Yeah, and so I'll play devil's advocate for a second, because folks might be thinking to themselves, wait a second, I already thought it was against the law for a non-citizen to vote. And that is the case in state and federal elections. But these municipal elections are controlled by these municipalities. And so we've seen these, as you mentioned, New York and Washington, D.C., these ultra-liberal areas change the rules on who can vote and not vote in that election, because they're the ones in charge of it instead of the state and the federal government and the Constitution in that sense. So,
in Texas we have a statutory ban on non-citizen voting, but we those statutory bans are pretty easy to get undone, and we want to make sure that we have it in our Constitution, that raising that bar to make sure that it doesn't come to Texas.
Yep. And I know for the Republican ballot, March 5th, we have a question on one of our primary proposition ballots about U.S. citizen voting. The number escapes me off the top of my head, but if you're voting in the Republican primary, you should look for that and vote for it. It's not a policy. It's just kind of a guideline and a way for Republican voters to express their support for an issue like this. And so hopefully that helps us gain some steam as we head into not just the campaign season, but then into the legislative session in 2025 to get a constitutional amendment on this.
Yeah, and if you look at polling nationally on this issue, and we'll get a nice gauge from the Republican primary testing that issue, but if you look at just national polls on this, it's a 80-90% issue on this. And to get to 80-90%, that's not just a Republican issue, right? That is Democrat. This is a bipartisan. Any coalition you can think of, any demographic you can think of, is against non-citizen voting. I think the only people that are for it are MSNBC contributors. It's wildly popular, and so Texas needs to take the lead on that and make sure that we get that in our Constitution.
Awesome. Well, Chad, those are real quick and easy top 3 big things to be on the lookout for the legislative session. Anything else we need to plug on this one?
Yeah, that's if we can do those things, I think Texas will continue to lead the country in election integrity.
Awesome. So things to be on the lookout for here over the summer and to talk with folks about while they're on the campaign trail, and then as we head into 2025, be on the lookout for legislative things to ban ranked choice voting, ban these new Zuck bucks with their organization, and to get a constitutional amendment to ensure that it's only U.S. citizens that can vote in Texas.
Couldn't have said it better.
Excellent. Chad, thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate it, and we will see everybody soon.